once. The nation that once produced half the world's wealth now carries over $37 trillion in debt, more than its entire economy. 1 in 5 households can't afford groceries without credit. The middle class that built skyscrapers in suburbs is vanishing while tents rise in their shadows. The dollar trembles, cities hollow out, and the world quietly turns away. This isn't just another downturn, it's a historic unraveling. Every sign from collapsing tourism to soaring foreclosures whispers the same truth. America is no longer unshakable, it's breaking. For decades, the American dollar was the foundation of global trust. Today, that trust is fracturing. The United States carries $37 trillion in national debt, and interest payments alone are now larger than the entire defense budget. Every minute, the nation adds nearly $120 million in new debt, a ticking clock echoing across Wall Street and Washington. The bond market, once America's safest asset, is now trembling with foreign buyers quietly stepping back. Nations from China to Brazil are trading in their own currencies, signaling a slow but historic retreat from the dollar's dominance. Inflation may have eased on paper, but reality tells a harsher story. The average American household now pays $1,162 more per month for the same essentials they bought in 2020. Real wages are stagnant, savings have evaporated, and credit card balances have hit an all-time high of $114 trillion. This isn't prosperity. It's survival on borrowed time. The Federal Reserve calls it stabilization, but it feels more like managed decline. Every empire's collapse begins not with invasion, but with overconfidence in its currency. When faith in the dollar cracks, everything else follows. The housing market, job stability, even political unity. The rest of the world can see it. BRICS nations expanding, global reserves shifting, gold accumulation hitting record highs. America's greatest export, its financial credibility, is now its most fragile product. This economic erosion is not isolated. It's the first domino in a chain reaction. When money weakens, housing collapses. When people can't buy homes, consumer spending falls. When cities lose revenue, jobs vanish. And when jobs disappear, nations lose faith. What we're witnessing isn't just a financial downturn, it's the systematic unraveling of a global power built on debt, illusion, and denial. The question is no longer if the dollar will stumble, but what collapses next when it finally does. As the dollar weakens, the foundation of American life, home ownership, has become an illusion. The median home price has surged past $431,000, while the median household income struggles to reach $59,000. A typical buyer now needs an annual income of over $115,000 just to afford an average house. With mortgage rates sitting above 7.5%, the dream of ownership has transformed into a lifetime of rent. For millions, a 30-year loan no longer means security. It means servitude. More than 80% of renters say they can't afford to buy a home within the next 5 years. The number of rent-burdened households, those paying over 50% of income on rent, has reached a record 22 million. Even as wages stagnate, rents have soared 27% since 2020. Meanwhile, institutional investors, Wall Street landlords, now own more than 20% of all single-family rentals, converting the housing market into an extractive machine that feeds on the very people it once served. The consequences ripple outward. Construction slows as borrowing costs climb. Small builders go bankrupt while large developers hoard supply to manipulate scarcity. Real estate taxes climb, yet public services deteriorate. This isn't a housing cycle, it's a structural collapse. The so-called soft landing is a fairy tale told by policymakers who don't live in the world they've priced out. And it's not stopping here. Rising defaults are already pushing the next crisis into motion. The Mortgage Bankers Association reports delinquencies increasing in 38 states, while the average American homeowner's equity is shrinking for the first time since 2012. The housing sector, once the heartbeat of American wealth, is now a trap. When the currency erodes, the market follows. When the market breaks, the dream collapses. What remains is a generation forced to rent forever, cities filled with vacant luxury towers, and a nation where property no longer represents progress, but proof of exclusion. The housing mirage has faded, revealing the same truth that haunts the economy itself. America's foundation isn't solid anymore. It's cracking beneath the weight of its own illusion. The illusion of stability has finally shattered. Across the nation, foreclosure filings have surged 22% in 2025, the highest rate since the aftermath of the 2008 crash. In states like Florida, Illinois, and Ohio, 1 in every 800 homes is in default. Adjustable rate mortgages that once seemed manageable have turned lethal as monthly payments jump by hundreds of dollars. The era of cheap credit is gone, and millions are being crushed beneath its return. More than 340,000 households entered some stage of foreclosure in the first half of the year, with banks repossessing properties at a pace not seen in over a decade. Behind each number lies an economy built on debt dependency. Families are refinancing to survive inflation, then collapsing under rising interest. Credit delinquencies are up across every category: car loans, student debt, credit cards. The chain reaction is spreading through the system, tightening liquidity and choking growth. This isn't a correction, it's a breakdown. Mortgage applications are at a 28-year low, housing inventory is stagnant, and even cash buyers are stepping back. The so-called resilient consumer narrative has disintegrated. Home ownership, once America's primary engine of wealth creation, is now fueling financial contagion. With every foreclosure, property values decline, local tax bases erode, and small towns lose their fiscal lifeline. The deeper danger is psychological. When Americans lose faith in housing, their single biggest investment, their belief in recovery, collapses with it. The markets sense it, investors sense it, and now the public does too. The housing mirage has become a debt graveyard, and the foreclosure wave is only the beginning. From currency erosion to home decay, the pattern is unmistakable. The system is unraveling layer by layer, each collapse feeding the next. And as financial foundations crumble, another silent casualty emerges: America's image abroad. Because when a nation can't protect its own homeowners, the world stops trusting its promises. As the financial cracks widen, America's global image is collapsing alongside its economy. The once vibrant tourism industry, a $181 billion pillar of national revenue, has entered free fall. International arrivals are down 8.2% this year, and spending has plunged to $169 billion, erasing over $12.5 billion from the economy. Canada, the largest source of visitors, has cut trips by 37%, while major airlines such as Air Canada and Delta are slashing U.S. routes. What was once the most desired destination on Earth now stands as a cautionary tale of bureaucracy, inflation, and hostility. The $442 visa cost, one of the highest globally, has turned America into a premium brand nobody wants to buy. Visitors from India, Brazil, and China are choosing Europe, Mexico, and the Caribbean instead. Global travel councils confirmed that the United States is the only major nation where international visitor spending is still declining. The economic hit extends far beyond airports. Empty hotel rooms, idle tour buses, and shuttered restaurants echo through every state that once thrived on foreign guests. But the consequences are not just financial, they are symbolic. Tourism represents trust, and trust is vanishing. Cities like New York, Las Vegas, and Orlando have downgraded forecasts by billions, anticipating fewer visitors even during peak seasons. For a nation preparing to host the 2026 FIFA World Cup and the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics, this trend is catastrophic. If perception doesn't change, these global spectacles could expose America's decline on the world stage. Half-empty stadiums, overpriced hotels, visa delays, and global headlines describing a once open nation struggling to welcome its guests. Tourism is not just an industry, it's a mirror. It reflects how the world feels about you, and the reflection staring back at the United States is bleak. Fear, fatigue, and fading relevance. From collapsing housing markets to empty airports, the message is identical. The American brand, once the definition of aspiration, is becoming a symbol of decline. When global confidence collapses, labor collapses with it. The so-called booming job market has become a carefully engineered illusion, hiding a system in retreat. Corporate layoffs are surging, concentrated in technology, logistics, and banking, sectors once celebrated as recession-proof. Behind the government's polished numbers, full-time positions are being replaced with part-time contracts and temporary gigs. The United States is no longer creating stable employment, it's manufacturing insecurity. Automation has accelerated the unraveling. According to Deloitte, 40% of all U.S. jobs are at risk of automation by 2030, including white-collar roles once considered safe. Artificial intelligence has replaced analysts, customer service staff, and even entry-level engineers. Every efficiency celebrated by corporations represents another paycheck erased from the middle class. Productivity has risen 12% since 2020, yet real wages remain flat. A silent admission that growth now benefits algorithms more than workers. The labor force participation rate sits near its lowest in decades, and household savings are evaporating. The average American now carries over $61,000 in personal debt, relying on credit cards to fill the gap left by stagnant income. Even healthcare, once tied to stable employment, is fracturing. Millions lose coverage the moment they lose their job. This is not cyclical weakness, it's structural rot. The psychological damage is irreversible. Workers no longer plan careers, they plan survival. A generation raised to believe hard work guarantees progress is now learning that effort is irrelevant in an automated economy. As unemployment insurance funds strain and corporations hoard cash through stock buybacks, confidence in the American labor model is disintegrating. This erosion of labor feeds directly into the next collapse, urban and commercial decay. When people stop earning, they stop spending. When consumption stops, cities crumble. The boarded storefronts, declining tax revenue, and vanishing small businesses spreading across the nation aren't isolated tragedies. They're the natural outcome of an economy where human beings have become the disposable part of the system. The job market isn't adapting, it's imploding, and with it, the foundation of America's identity as a land of opportunity. When jobs disappear, cities begin to suffocate. Across the United States, commercial life is collapsing in plain sight. Over 15,000 retail stores are closing in 2025 alone. Flagship names like Walgreens, Macy's, and CVS are abandoning neighborhoods once considered untouchable. Shopping malls, the cultural hubs of 20th century America, now stand hollowed out, with vacancy rates exceeding 22% in many metro areas. Each closure isn't just a business loss, it's the disappearance of a community anchor, a sign that consumer spending, the bloodstream of capitalism, is running dry. The consequences extend far beyond storefronts. When retail dies, cities lose tax revenue, transportation networks weaken, and urban maintenance stalls. Empty buildings attract crime, pushing residents out and property values down. The so-called recovery narrative evaporates under the glow of flickering for-lease signs. In once vibrant downtowns like San Francisco, Chicago, and Portland, foot traffic is down by over 40% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Local governments now face record shortfalls, forcing cuts to policing, sanitation, and transit. The decay becomes self-feeding, less safety, fewer shoppers, deeper collapse. Remote work has amplified the implosion. Over 45% of office space in major cities sits unused, with commercial landlords defaulting on billions in loans. Skyscrapers that once symbolized ambition have become vertical liabilities, draining banks and pension funds invested in them. When offices go dark, nearby cafes, dry cleaners, and restaurants vanish. Every lost worker takes with them a chain of economic dependencies that no stimulus package can revive. This is not urban evolution, it's urban expiration. America's largest cities are shrinking from the inside, while smaller towns dependent on retail chains are collapsing entirely. The architecture of prosperity has become the architecture of abandonment. The destruction doesn't stop at storefronts. When economic centers crumble, essential goods become harder to access and prices spiral upward. Food, transportation, and energy, everything tied to the urban economy becomes more expensive. The retail collapse is not merely about shopping. It's the visible proof that the American city, once the beating heart of global capitalism, is running out of oxygen. As cities decay and incomes vanish, the next crisis emerges quietly at the dinner table. Food inflation has become America's most brutal equalizer, affecting every income bracket, every grocery aisle, and every household budget. The cost of basic groceries has risen over 21% since 2020, but real wages have barely moved. A family of four now spends an average of $1,076 per month on food, compared to just $780 before the pandemic. Meat, grains, and produce have become strategic commodities rather than daily necessities. The promise of affordability has been replaced by the arithmetic of survival. This isn't simple inflation, it's structural scarcity. Droughts, logistics failures, fuel volatility, and corporate consolidation have concentrated control of the food supply into a few massive conglomerates. 4 companies now dominate 85% of the U.S. meat market, allowing prices to remain inflated even as production costs stabilize. Meanwhile, grocery profit margins have doubled since 2019, proving that inflation is no longer a temporary crisis. It's a permanent business model. Behind every checkout counter lies a silent collapse in living standards. Nearly 40% of Americans now rely on credit cards for groceries, while food banks report demand up 16% year over year. Even middle-class households are rationing meals, switching to processed substitutes, or skipping fresh produce altogether. It's not a recession symptom, it's a slow erosion of nutrition, dignity, and stability. The Federal Reserve may claim victory over inflation, but the grocery aisle tells the real story. A nation where paychecks no longer determine diets. As supply chains falter and transportation costs remain high, prices continue to climb while confidence collapses. When food becomes unaffordable, every other sector unravels. Healthcare costs surge, productivity falls, and poverty accelerates. The economy that once fed the world now struggles to feed itself. From shuttered cities to hollowed-out supermarkets, the message is unambiguous. The American middle class has been priced out of survival. The collapse is no longer hidden in charts or forecasts. It's sitting on the dinner table, staring back at 330 million people who can no longer afford to eat like citizens of the world's richest nation. When food becomes unaffordable, society fractures. The wealth gap in America has reached its widest point in modern history. The top 10% now control nearly 70% of all wealth, while the bottom half own less than 2%. This is no longer a class divide. It's economic segregation on a national scale. The middle class, once the stabilizing force of the republic, is evaporating, replaced by a new binary society. Those who can endure inflation and those who are consumed by it. Homelessness has surged 11% in just 1 year, pushing the total to over 660,000 Americans without permanent shelter, the highest since data collection began. Tent cities stretch from Seattle to Miami, while suburban poverty quietly explodes beyond the spotlight. Public schools report a record 2.5 million children experiencing housing insecurity. The clearest evidence that collapse isn't theoretical, it's generational. The American dream is being rewritten into a survival manual. Healthcare, education, and basic mobility are following the same pattern: concentrated privilege at the top, abandonment at the bottom. Nearly 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and 40% would struggle to cover a $400 emergency. In cities, luxury high-rises overlook encampments where families survive on expired groceries and generator fumes. The distance between prosperity and despair is now measured in blocks. This inequality isn't accidental, it's systemic. Decades of deregulation, speculative finance, and political paralysis have converted citizenship into a lottery ticket. The social contract that once promised opportunity has dissolved into a hierarchy of survival. As local services collapse under budget shortfalls, the government substitutes data for solutions, counting the poor instead of helping them. The erosion of dignity always precedes the erosion of democracy. When citizens no longer believe they have a stake in the system, they stop defending it. What began as a cost of living crisis has mutated into a legitimacy crisis. From unaffordable homes to collapsing wages and empty grocery shelves, the outcome is identical. America's social fabric isn't fraying at the edges anymore. It's tearing through the center. And when the thread that binds a nation breaks, no economy can hold it together. As inequality deepens and confidence evaporates, the machinery of American governance has entered paralysis. Congress operates like a failed corporation. Performative debates, shutdown threats, and no coherent fiscal strategy. The United States has now faced 4 government shutdown threats within 24 months, each one eroding global faith in its ability to function. While families scramble to afford food and rent, lawmakers gamble with the debt ceiling of a $37 trillion economy. Political brinkmanship has replaced policy. The rest of the world sees dysfunction where leadership once stood. The consequences ripple through every sector. Credit rating agencies have already downgraded U.S. debt outlooks and citing political instability and structural stagnation. Every shutdown or near shutdown halts paychecks for 1.5 million federal workers, stalls economic activity, and drains billions from productivity. The inability to pass budgets on time reflects a government that governs nothing. It manages chaos while pretending to debate reform. Trade wars have amplified the crisis. The Trump-era tariffs, many of which remain intact, have backfired, adding over $80 billion in costs to American consumers and reducing export competitiveness. Retaliatory tariffs from China, Canada, and the EU have slashed agricultural and manufacturing revenues, leaving small producers bankrupt and large corporations shifting supply chains overseas. What was framed as economic protection has mutated into long-term isolation. The result is a feedback loop of dysfunction. Rising debt leads to partisan warfare. Warfare triggers shutdowns. Shutdowns weaken credit, and weakened credit raises borrowing costs. The system now consumes itself to survive. Foreign investors and allies see it clearly. Washington can't even fund its own government without crisis theater. This political paralysis is not just inefficiency, it's erosion of legitimacy. When citizens witness their leaders weaponizing collapse for votes, national unity dies. Policy has been replaced by tribalism, governance by spectacle. America's domestic instability now echoes globally. It is no longer the stabilizer of markets, but their greatest uncertainty. And as government fractures, the world's perception shifts permanently. Because once a superpower becomes unreliable, power doesn't pause, it moves elsewhere. When a nation can no longer govern itself, the world begins to look elsewhere for leadership. America's decline is no longer confined to its borders. It's visible in every global indicator of influence. The dollar's dominance is being systematically challenged as BRICS nations expand, openly promoting trade in local currencies. U.S. foreign investment has dropped 22% since 2020, while China's Belt and Road Initiative now outspends American foreign aid by a ratio of 10.1. The empire that once shaped the planet through confidence now relies on nostalgia. Global trust has fractured. A 2025 Pew survey shows that favorable opinions of the United States have fallen to their lowest in 2 decades, particularly across Europe, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. The causes are cumulative: political instability, economic decline, mass shootings, and aggressive foreign policy rhetoric. Where once the world saw democracy and opportunity, it now sees division and dysfunction. America's brand, the idea that freedom leads to prosperity, has been downgraded to an export no one is buying. Soft power, the ability to inspire rather than intimidate, has withered. Foreign student enrollment has fallen 18%, depriving universities of billions and weakening cultural exchange. Hollywood's global box office share has dropped from 65% to 48%, replaced by Korean, Indian, and European studios. Even American technology companies, once symbols of innovation, are facing bans and restrictions abroad amid data and monopoly concerns. The cultural engine that fueled U.S. dominance is sputtering. Diplomatically, Washington's credibility has collapsed under the weight of inconsistency. Allies hesitate, adversaries adapt, and neutral nations diversify alliances. Mexico, France, and Saudi Arabia are openly conducting trade in yuan. The global message is unmistakable. The world no longer needs America to function. From the weakening dollar to the collapse of cities and the decay of governance, every fracture leads to the same conclusion. The superpower that once defined modern civilization has entered strategic retreat economically, morally, and ideologically. America's fall isn't being forced by enemies, it's being accelerated by indifference. And as the world turns the page, the question left behind is devastatingly simple. Who will stop a collapse that no longer shocks anyone? Every warning sign now points in one direction. The dollar is trembling, housing is collapsing, cities are hollowing out, food is unaffordable, inequality is rising, and government has lost control. America is no longer leading the world. It's struggling to lead itself. The collapse isn't coming. It's already unfolding in data, in silence, in daily life. What once held nations together, trust, stability, purpose, has disintegrated. History doesn't repeat, it reveals. Every empire believes it's too advanced to fall until it does. And the United States, the wealthiest nation on earth, is learning that collapse doesn't announce itself, it simply arrives.